Billy Turriff here. I'm a full-time property developer and investor. One of the key questions I get a lot is what strategy should I follow? It's also an area I find that people struggle with in terms of working out what is the right strategy for them at this given time. And I think part of the reason for that is that it's overwhelm. Ultimately there's so many different strategies out there, and we're looking externally, potentially maybe to what we see as exciting, what we would like to do, rather than actually considering what resources do we have available to execute an appropriate strategy. I firmly believe and operate in property really as a long-term investor rather than a business owner, and it's really in that background that I'm going to give my comments in this presentation. So one of the things I find with people when looking at the strategy that's right for them to help them get to a clear direction, I think you need to look internally. And there's two things almost internally that impact you. One is how much time you have available to work on it, and how much finances you have available to execute against that. What does that mean in practice? Well, if you're time rich but you don't have much finances, doing a strategy such as rent to rent would work well. Rent to rent is when you would work with an existing landlord, typically rent their house on a long-term lease. That landlord had probably been renting their house as a single let before, you then turn it into a multi-let, thereby increasing the overall rent and having a gain from the margin for it. There's a lot of regulations around that, don't want to go into that today, but in particular you need to make sure the mortgage terms allow for it. But the point is, with a rent to rent, you need limited funds because you're not actually buying the property, so you don't need a 25% deposit. You'll still need some funds, you'll need to pay a couple of months rent, you'll probably need some furnishings, and you might have some light decoration to do. Another strategy you might want to consider with time rich but limited funds is actually going out and sourcing other deals for other people, and then saving that funds you get from sourcing and then ultimately buying your own property at a later date. For those people who have limited time but they have some funds available to them, actually doing single lets can be a good strategy. And we see that strategy applied quite often for people who are in full-time jobs, and ultimately they don't really want to shift their focus like I've done in terms of being kind of a full-time investor and having a significant income stream from it, but they see it as an investment that will provide a pension for them, or at least work in partnership with their pension at a later date. And I firmly believe that's what most people have. They've got a couple of properties, and I think the reality is whether those properties double in value every 10 years, every 15 years, every 20 years, it's still a great investment to make over the long run, as typically the gains or the real financial gains to property investing is from long-term buy to hold. So single lets can be a great strategy if you don't have much time. You can outsource most of the tasks, you can get an agent to manage it. Single lets, you'll have a lot less voids, people are likely to stay longer. Touch wood, you shouldn't have as many challenges with tenants as you may have with multi-lets. It's as close to passive as you will get, but I want to be clear, I'm not all in favour of saying any property is passive. As a landlord, you've got business responsibilities, you've got legal responsibilities, so you need to be fully aware from them. If you want to do something completely hands-off, go and invest in a FTSE tracker or go and work through an IFA. I think you'll probably find your returns are lower, but you can still get into the property market with limited time by outsourcing and doing stuff like single lets. People who've got lots of time and reasonable access to funds might want to do a build to rent strategy. That's when you go and source a deal and then you build it and then you fully operate it. Build to rent can be from small schemes, a couple of new builds, to 1,000 unit apartments in the city centre. But the key thing is you're getting two bites of the cherry. You're typically gaining financially when you develop it in terms of the end value increasing, and then you're gaining long term because you're holding it. You don't have to go to the full build to rent strategy there. You may also just have a portfolio of HMOs, you may have a portfolio of serviced accommodation. But the point is, you're really operating at a business level there, so you're maximising your time, and you've got reasonable funds available to you. For people who don't have the time, but they do have the funds, doing a strategy such as commercial can be a great approach to take. When I say commercial strategy here, I really mean prime commercial, so leases to FTSE 100 companies, leases to FTSE 250 companies, where you buy a building and you just leave it for 25, 50 years. You may do other strategies down there. So you'll have a lot of family offices that will work in this basis, and they'll do joint ventures with other people whereby they'll provide the funding to do the deal, and then they'll take a part of the return from it. So there's lots of different strategies out there, but again, I think you really need to think about how much time you've got and how much cash you've got. So kind of look at those internal factors there, I say, and that will help you to identify what strategy is right for you today. And I just want to be clear with this. What I'm not saying is that's the strategy you have to do for the rest of your life. Lots of us will move through different parts of this matrix. So when I started my journey, I was working in the corporate world and had very limited experience of investing. And I started off in single let. I bought a couple of apartments and I let them out. As I left the corporate world and I built a portfolio that could replace my income, I then moved into having time and having access to funds. And then my strategy there was far more around doing development projects. Now, as my kind of business has evolved, I've actually moved down into using my funds and leveraging off them. So I'll work with other investors, let them find the deal, I'll help to support them with it through finance, and take a margin off that. Where you actually want to end up is unique to yourself. There's no right or wrong, but what strategy you can do at that time, I firmly believe, on how much cash you've got and how much money you've got. There is a third element to this that I haven't gone into. For each of these areas then also depends on what experience and what knowledge you get. But I believe that can be learned. Ultimately, I think we're kind of privileged in the property industry. We're not doing brain transplants, we're not doing heart transplant, and that stuff can be learned out there, or ultimately you can pay professionals for it. So whilst I'm a developer, I've got limited kind of building experience, so I will work with architects, I'll work with QSs, and we'll work with building teams to do that. But you ultimately, it's not, just to be clear, it's not a case of just pick a strategy and then you can go and do it. You ultimately do need to then dive deep into that strategy and find out all the nuances and the technical and the experience for it. But where people struggle because they don't know what strategy to start with, they spend too much time diving a little bit into each of the strategy and ultimately not progressing. So what do you then do? So once you've got your strategy nailed, I then say you need to think about how do you actually source the deal. And that's the key bit that will give you a competitive advantage. Why do I say that? Say that because simply there is less deals out there than what there is money. So it's really the deals that can make a difference to how fast you'll progress and how well you'll ultimately do in the property business. In an ideal world, people will say, well, let's use a sourcer, let's outsource that to someone else. The reality is a very good deal will make significant money, whether it's 10% under market, whether it's 20% under market, whether it's because it's going to give a good return on investment over 20, 30 years. And I find that not many people who can source those sort of deals are quite happy just to give them away for a small fund. I personally have only managed to buy one deal from a sourcer that I found meets my criteria. So I would encourage everyone to take responsibility to learn sourcing skills, or to maybe work with a joint venture partner who's strong in that area. Once you start to source deals and you've got a decent pipeline, you can then look at how you actually finance the deal. In terms of financing the deals, there's loads of options out there to you now. You can go direct to banks, you can work with great brokers, there's lots of crowdfunding sites, you can have joint venture partners, you can have private investors. Again, the reality to me is the options are out there. You need to get educated, you need to run the numbers, you need to feel where you're more comfortable, crowdfunding versus brokers, direct banks. Some of it's personal choice, but those processes and systems are out there and available to you. Ultimately, once you've then got your purchase, you do need to operate it, okay? That's really a story for another video. And what I really wanted to do today was just try and share with you the framework that I typically use when I'm working with people to help them to identify the strategy. Once you get the strategy, you can then dive deep into it and get all the supporting knowledge and the supporting information you need. But where a lot of people struggle is they don't get the strategy nailed at the start. And ultimately, until you've actually got your strategy, until you've got clarity on that, you're not going to be able to get the results you want. And even worse, you may find that you buy something that isn't aligned to your strategy, so you actually end up going down the wrong road. I've been doing some presentations across the UK on the spaces for the last couple of months. Got a full set of slides that goes into detail about each of these areas. If you'd like to get a copy of them, please PM me and I'll share with you. Thanks for listening. I'm Billy Turriff, full-time property developer.